All right. Thank you for joining the Campfire Curmudgeon. My name is Nicholas Jones. Joining me is my co-host Heidi. And today on the show, we have a distinguished guest. His name is Christopher R. Smith. He is a friend and also co-host of a different podcast that we have called the John Carpentcast. Chris, how you doing today?
I've been better, but I can get through this.
That's all I'm asking you for. So here today we are going to be talking about, again, campfire stories, the kind of thing you talk about around the campfire. And the subject, we're going to do a theme here, and I'm going to let you take over and tell us about that and get us rolling.
All right. Our theme for this episode is astral projection. We decided on this theme. Already.
Just getting
starting
an early start.
already.
Yeah.
All right. We decided on this theme. Actually, Chris and I were kind of talking about some experience that he had with different paranormal activity in his life, and astral projection came out.
Possibly paranormal.
Possibly paranormal.
I'm on the fence myself.
All right. Well, we've got a skeptic, a believer, and an on the fence. So there you go. But when you were telling me your story about astral projection, I found it really interesting, so I'm definitely going to have you tell your story real quick. To you, what is astral projection? Like, what do you define it as?
Well, generally, from what I've heard from other paranormal podcasts and things like that, it's when the consciousness, which is possibly something separate from the physical body, leaves and moves to another location and is aware of that space and what's happening in that space. It's related to remote viewing, which is kind of the same thing. Okay. That's a more calculated form of that. Where it was actually, and we can talk about this more later, that the government actually did have programs for this.
That's right.
During the Cold War to try and spy on the Russians through remote viewing, but we can get deeper into that later.
It's funny you bring up remote viewing because I've always kind of thought of that as really separate, but when you bring it up like that, that makes sense that it would be not the same thing necessarily, but part of that same kind of...
Yeah, I'm sure there are people that will have huge arguments about the differences, but astral projection, I think you'll hear a lot more spiritual talk, because it's
definitely.
like almost every religion has some form of it.
Yes.
And then remote viewing is when it's tried, when like science or pseudoscience tries to make it factual and find a... Applied purpose, exactly. So that's kind of the way I've seen it, but you can kind of use the two. I think they're the same thing.
So I think the astral projection part of it is it hinges on dualism. That hey, the body and the mind,
right.
The body and the soul, two separate things.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas and the remote viewing is, well, even if we're not sure about the validity of dualism, let's try to see if we can look in and see what the Russian nuclear codes are.
Right, because they're probably doing this to us, so we might as well give it a shot.
Yeah.
Well, I looked up what the internet defined it as because I was curious as to what the actual definition that was widely accepted was, and what I found was the willful out-of-body experience, so you actually intending, which I found kind of... I don't know if I would say necessarily it has to be willful, because I've heard lots of stories of people that were like, and then I found myself having an out-of-body experience. They weren't intending to.
The story, when we get to my story, that it is not willful.
Okay.
Right, a lot of people don't like the sensation.
It was not a pleasant experience, these experiences I had.
I also found a lot of connection with dreams. People that had been dreaming or had been in surgery, near-death experiences, those seem to kind of play a part as well and be kind of connected.
Unique circumstances under which they're under narcotics that they've never had running
that
through their veins.
That was another one, was hallucinogens or even
I'm
different...
talking about anesthesia, but yes.
Well, I mean, hey, that is a drug.
Dying on the operating room table, the story you hear again and again, they're floating above their body, the light, all that. Yeah, just... If I can come down on that one, I think that... I'm a skeptic on that one. Mm-hmm. I think that is some kind of psychological... that's not to say there aren't some... The floating above the body thing maybe might have something to do with astral projection or remote viewing, whatever you want to call it. But I think the experience is something the brain does.
Okay, so
I think
it's
in
more like
neurochemical
a coping mechanism or something?
With the brain shutting down, this is kind of a way...
Trying to figure it out, yeah.
That's where I come down on that one, because I know some people have a much more spiritual or paranormal approach to it, but since we're debating the differences here.
No, that's absolutely that's great. Did you want to actually tell us your experience with astral projection, or what is potentially
Potentially, yeah.
astral projection?
Because it all boils down to these are probably just weird dreams, because I've always had weird dreams.
Mm-hmm.
I've had problems with sleep since I was a kid. I'm a hardcore insomniac. I've tried all kinds of medications. And then when I do sleep, I have very stressful dreams. A lot of times I wake up more
Me
exhausted
too.
than I was when I went to bed.
Too.
So sleep is not always a very pleasant experience for me. And then when I was in my mid-20s, I guess I'd say, I started having these experiences that I tried to push off as dreams, but that something about them felt completely different. Because I would just suddenly find myself like in someone else's house or someone else's apartment.
Were these at night though?
Usually when I was having them, or
Yeah.
I was at night or usually early in the morning.
Okay.
So this is like 3, 4 a.m.
Okay.
when I finally did fall asleep after trying to fall asleep since midnight, and then having to get up to go to work at 5. So after stressing out all night, there a lot of times they're stress related,
Okay.
which I think is part of it. Because like I'd have to get up for work at 5. It's suddenly 3 o'clock, and I haven't fallen asleep yet. So I'm stressing,
Just
and that's
freaking
what's
out.
keeping me out, is keeping me up. It's like, no, tomorrow's going to be terrible, and that's why I can't sleep, because I'm stressing about tomorrow, and eventually my body just gets so exhausted that it just knocks me out. And that's kind of when these happen. And I'll just find myself suddenly in someone else's apartment. Can we swear on the show? Or?
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Okay, all right.
It's listed as explicit on under
Okay,
iTunes.
yeah. And so, I'll just suddenly be in, and it feels as real as, dreams when you're in them always feel completely real.
So it feels like a lucid dream that is not a dream.
Yeah, suddenly I'm just in someone's house. I'm just like, oh shit, what am I doing here? I don't know where I am. And
Was it someone you knew, or
No, I don't
Okay,
recognize these
wow.
places at all. And I'll try and walk from room to room. It's almost like the Black Lodge in Twin Peaks in that final episode, and he's trying to get out, and he just leaves one room and I'll end up in different rooms, and sometimes I don't even know if they're in the same house or apartment.
Oh wow.
But I'm just wandering from room to room, and I can't find my way out, and then sometimes there are people in there. And
Do they see you? Do they notice you?
They do not.
Wow.
I'm like, if someone, and we can talk about this later, because I had experience when someone did actually, I had a paranormal experience in my apartment when someone one day just walked into if we can do a tangent, maybe that'd be interesting, because that could be the flip side of what I'm experiencing, except I noticed it. This was just a Sunday morning. I was, my apartment is a kind of 2-story loft kind of thing. Yeah, you've been there. And so our living room was upstairs. And the only way to get to the living room where the TV was, where I was, is up those stairs, and they would have to pass me. And there's a bathroom up there. And so I was sitting there watching TV, and then this guy just walks out of the bathroom, and just completely, not like a ghost like or anything, just some person walks out. And I was just like, who the fuck are you? I didn't say anything.
Hey, buddy.
I didn't have a chance. I was just staring at him, and he seemed as surprised as I was. Just like, what? This isn't my place.
Oh, no.
And then he like took a couple more steps, and then it was just gone. And not like in a mist. He was just suddenly just blinked out of existence.
It's like the way Lynch would shoot it.
Yes,
it's like a camera shift and then he's gone.
Yeah.
Like basically, like let's cut and then.
And I didn't know, and like he didn't. He looked like a '90s music executive. Like he was wearing kind of a suit but no tie and had this weird hair. I don't know. That's the best way I can describe him.
Yeah, no, I picture exactly what you're talking about there.
Yeah. And he just seemed very confused, as confused as I was, because I was just sitting on my couch, just watching TV.
Oh, wow. Did you run up there to see if you could tell that he had been actually in the bathroom?
Yeah, I went into the bathroom.
Yeah?
There was no, and unless he climbed through the window, and this was a 3rd-story window.
Yeah.
And he.
Was this? You said it was a Sunday morning.
Yeah.
And you were watching TV.
Mm-hmm.
You're making faces
saying I'm
there.
supposed to be at church, Nick?
Yeah.
Is that what you're saying? I can preface all of this too, since we're doing the debate thing. I'm an atheist.
Right.
Just kind of my stance on supernatural, and I don't even like that word completely.
Right.
The whole thing in general is that I think there are things in the world that science has not explained yet.
Yes.
But I think they are part of the natural world. It's just like for centuries, electricity was this mysterious thing.
Or what we get, or electromagnetic radiation.
Yeah, radiation, all of that.
Yeah. Visible light. Yeah.
So when we did see effects of it, it's like, oh, these are the gods, these are these things. I think there's still I think it's arrogant to think that science has figured everything out right now, because 200 years from now, psychic phenomena may just be a basic understood scientific fact.
That would be interesting.
Just once we actually figure out how to measure it and but because it got co-opted by this whole new agey wacko and a bunch of fraud people, mainstream science chose to ignore it.
I would say my response to your experience in your living room with the guy coming out, like you said, like there would be times where I would wake up and I'd be in a place where I don't know, and I recognize, like, I'm on Earth, I'm in somebody's apartment,
right? Yeah.
And then you had the same experience of somebody in your home. I would say, is that possible? Like, obviously, in a dream state, that's an artifact of the brain. That's the brain manufacturing it. Is it possible that you're manufacturing, like, because actual consciousness, like, we're the last ones to know what we're thinking and what our decisions are. It's all bubbling up underneath the surface of our subconscious. That's where all of our, like, every decision we make is basically an emotional decision, but we stack it on top of so many layers of intellect. We say, oh, well, I've thought about this a lot and I've made this decision. Turns out you're making an emotional decision if you dig down hard enough. Is it possible that what you saw or what you're recalling is an artifact of your brain?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
So I'm on the fence in this. I'm just saying that's what I experienced in that moment.
That's an interesting experience to have, though.
Yeah. It's just that I don't have an explanation for it, but I'm not saying he was a ghost. I'm not saying
also to have your dream state bookended by having that, like, it's like, wow, okay.
Yeah. It's just I was, stone cold sober, awake in the morning. Just, it was a normal day. Like, I was not asleep. I wasn't, I can understand when you are asleep, having certain thoughts where you kind of drift and things, and like
and you're
sometimes,
not yourself,
or things that happen to me because with my sleep problems, sometimes it kind of messes with your head. Sometimes I feel like I'm really thirsty. I'll get up and get a bottle of water and come back to bed, and then I reach for it, and I did not get up and go get the bottle and come back to bed. I just thought I did. And it was so easy to visualize because it was my apartment. And I knew exactly what that looks like and feels like. Like I could feel the water in my hand.
In that space,
But then once I go for the actual physical thing, it's not there. So I think there is some weird kind of wiggle room in the states of consciousness when it comes to sleep. Because since I have so many problems with sleep, I need to do more research on this. But I found out just recently, like in the past couple of weeks, about a disorder called what are the things? DSPD.
What does that
delayed
stand for?
Sleep Phase Disorder.
Okay.
And this is apparently in 2014. They just gave it a name, and it's still not considered, it's not on the books.
So is this the trouble going between the phases of sleep? You get stuck in the first couple of phases?
Yes,
is that
exactly.
What that is?
Yeah.
Okay.
And they say it has something to do with just your most human circadian rhythms are based on the 24-hour kind of cycle. Why most of our time is based on that kind of cycle, but some people it's just not.
And daylight and nighttime.
And daylight and nighttime, and for some people they just don't follow that cycle. And when you're trying to fit into a society that runs on that cycle, some people have a hard time with it.
You're fighting your body, essentially.
Yeah. It's basically like jet lag.
Okay.
And I just found out, when I heard about this, I was going through the symptoms. It's just like, oh, fuck, that's me.
Check.
So basically, I've been jet lagged for 15 years, and that's why I'm a mess now.
You're like, wow, I have what I have is actually can be acknowledged. I'm not Travis Bickle.
Well, it's interesting when you mention with the dreams and you're imagining being in a place that you don't know necessarily, like somebody's house or something. I had a lot of dreams like that when I was a kid. I also would sleepwalk. So a lot of the times when I had dreams that I was walking around somewhere, I was walking around my house, and a lot of the time I would never wake up from this. My mom would find me. She would have interactions with me I wouldn't remember, and I would go back to my room, go to bed, wake up, and I'd be like, that's weird. I feel like I went somewhere. She's like, well, you kind of did. You went downstairs. I'm like, so I don't know if you've ever if anybody's ever said you sleepwalk.
As far as I know, no.
No.
Apparently I talk in my sleep, in complete sentences.
That's fairly common, though.
But that's common, yeah. I mean, I have some friends from college who have an animated series. They both talk in their sleep and they record them and animate them, and they're a lot of fun. You can find them on YouTube. Sleep Talk Diaries, I think.
Sleep Talk Diaries. I'll have to
They're
check
very
that
short,
out.
but they're hilarious.
Oh, that's good.
Just some people usually Sleep Talk is just mumbling. But some people like me, it'll be complete nonsensical sentences.
My youngest brother used to. He probably still does. I just don't sleep in the same house as him anymore, so I don't hear the stories. Maybe my sister-in-law can tell me.
We'll have to give her a call. Can you?
But yeah, he would always mumble in his sleep, and I remember he was like, "Grandma, I don't want to go down." He's like, "Oh, you poor buddy."
But I think there is something there though, going back to science not explaining everything yet. So many things about the human brain and the complexity, and I think it's all a neural chemical kind of thing. Just I think there's aspects of it we haven't explored completely yet. And I think dreams is part of that. We kind of dismiss dreams as, it's just creating patterns while you're sleeping just to make sense of this nonsensical information from throughout the day, which could be completely true,
Yeah.
but maybe there's other levels to it. And this kind of astral projection, or whatever you want to call it, like why I don't dismiss these experiences as just dreams. Not only is it just they feel completely different, then once I wake up, it's like, oh, of course that was a dream. Like in the moment, it seemed completely coherent, and this is just reality.
Mm-hmm.
But then when you wake up, it's like
There's
that's
a subconscious logic.
we think about it, like, well, no, that's ridiculous. Like that's like I have a lot of dreams where like I'll be back at my old high school, and then when I wake up in the morning, it's like that looked nothing like my high school. Like I don't like, but in the dream that was my high school.
No,
Like,
it was.
I think I've messaged friends and been like, oh man, I just had the high school anxiety dream where I didn't have enough, like my GPA wasn't good enough to graduate,
no.
or I had I realized I'm flunking a class, and yesterday was the last day to drop the class, like college
I do that
anxiety
too.
dream.
I still wake up.
And I'm 35 years old, so it's like I
have the one where I show up for class one day, realize I haven't been there in like years, basically.
That's the one I have.
Then
what
it's
are
like
you doing
the
here?
final exam, and I haven't been there since like day one.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm not gonna lie. I was notorious for in like the big lecture hall classes. If I had a friend in that class, I'd be like, all right, tell me when the tests are. I'll show up for the class before, and I'll show up for the test. And she was always like, why do you have to leave me alone for this? She would send me like I didn't even have the book for the class. She would send me pictures of whatever it was we were supposed to study in the book. I would go to the class before, study that, take the test, and I mean, it worked out all right. I graduated, but I will have these dreams. I wake up like in a panic, like rushing for my computer, thinking that I have missed an exam or forgot about an online class or hadn't showed up to a class for too long and the teacher caught on. But
at least you have the diploma that you can turn around and look at. I'm like,
it's away somewhere. So sometimes I'm like, oh god, wait, did I really graduate?
All I have is like on the back of your head. There's your mom and dad. Like they were right. Like you should have finished. Like no,
sometimes
good.
I wake up from a dream because I have very stressful dreams. Not exactly.
Yeah.
I have nightmares too. But
mostly
tension dreams.
Where you're irritated the whole time.
Yeah, the whole time.
Yep.
And then when I wake up, I'm so relieved that was just a dream. And then I look at my actual reality. I'm like, oh no, it's not. This isn't much better. But that's just me.
So the astral projection.
Okay. So they don't, like I said, when you wake up, you realize that was clearly a dream. These don't feel like that.
Didn't feel like that.
Yeah.
Okay.
These specific dreams, they don't feel like that at all. Like I felt like I was physically in another space that I didn't know where it was, when it was. I mean, it always looks modern. It always looks like we're in North America.
Like the same time.
Kind of, yeah.
Okay.
The one of the most vivid ones, and something else about these that's different than dreams. I will wake up from them and just be like, oh fuck, that happened again, and they don't happen that often. Like
it's a different feeling than waking up from a dream. Is what
but
you're
I
saying.
will get up and get some water, go to the bathroom, whatever, go back to sleep, eventually fall asleep, and go back to the exact same place and have the same experience. And this can happen multiple times a night. And one of the most interesting and vivid ones I had, I told you about this one, Heidi. I went to, this might have been in like Mexico or South America because it did look different. Yeah. And I was suddenly in this family's house in the early morning, like they were getting up and making breakfast and stuff. And there was a mother and her 3 daughters, and they're all speaking Spanish, so I don't know what they were saying. And they didn't notice me. I was standing in their kitchen, and they were little kids running around, and she was cooking, and they just didn't notice me. But their dog was barking at me. They had this little yappy dog that would not stop growling and barking at me, and they were telling it to shut up. There's like, just stop it.
You're like,
and
you
it
can't
wouldn't.
see
It was
me.
just staring at me, and like I would move through the room, and it would follow me and keep barking at me. And so that was something that was different. And I went back to that.
That's fascinating.
I would wake up and go back. That happened like 3 or 4 times. I went back to the exact same house.
Oh wow!
And
so see, now every time my cats are looking at something, I'm gonna be like, "Who's here? What
I
can
was
you
just
see?"
going to make the argument that like you're the geocentrism and the ethnocentrism of all these astral projection stories. Like you never, like nobody in like Paducah, Kentucky ever astral projects to Bangkok, Thailand, and then
they do sometimes.
They
actually.
do. Yeah, I think from stories I've heard, they do.
Yeah, a lot of the time people are so far away.
A lot of Paducah World Travelers.
Well, they're just a lot
Maybe.
of the ones that I've read about are people in places they don't know where they are, but
Right.
they know it's somewhere very foreign, and they'll describe it. And sometimes someone's able to be like, well, I traveled here once. It kind of sounds like maybe you were there. But they're places they've never been, and they
Yeah.
don't know what they look like.
See, I think part of it is that, like, our dreams, like, everybody has the everyday, like, you know, dream. They're cliches of dreams, right? Like, we
Yeah.
just talked about the academic anxiety dream, or there's the
teeth falling out.
the teeth falling out. I'm stuck in mud and I'm being pursued by an enemy.
Never had that one.
Like, I can't move.
Yeah.
Like, I'm basically like I can't.
Yeah, I have that
evade
one.
I've ever had that
I
one.
can't evade my pursuer, right? Like,
Your body can't move
Like-
at any kind of speed.
there's
No,
there's
how
there's the
frustrating.
falling dream, and then,
Yes. Oh, I
I
get
have
those
those
all
a
the
lot,
time.
yeah.
and so these are tropes.
You're
These
just
are,
describing my week. I can make a calendar of when I have each of these.
but
Dream
my
journal.
But my point is that, like, I can't describe the contents of them, but I've had dreams where I've woken up and I've been like, I'm amazed. Like, this sounds so like douchey, but it's like I'm so impressed with my brain
Yeah.
that I had the dream I just had. Like, my dream set up its own, like, internal rules, like a movie, right?
Mhm.
Or, like, more complicated than Inception, and, like, twice as, like, and it was just, like, riveting. And then I wake up and I'm like, wow. Even though that was fake, I bought into it.
Yeah. In my dreams, it's architecture. Like,
Yeah.
there are buildings and like designs in my dreams that are just breathtaking, and I just wish I can draw well or remember
Right.
them even
You
in
can't-
the same intricacy
Yeah.
of what I experienced in the dream. Because, like, especially in my dreams, for some reason, it's museums and especially aquariums.
Mhm.
Oh, interesting.
Just the design of them is so incredible. Like, if someone had built this place, like, this could be huge. If I had the mind to actually translate what I saw
It would be
in real life, and I
interesting.
could actually try and recreate this,
Yeah.
it could be an amazing thing.
It'd be interesting
but I
to try to
can't do it.
describe it, like a
can't
Google
even,
search,
like,
and try
yeah.
to see if there was anything like that, like a basic description, and see if these places exist. If you're seeing like actual
Yeah, I don't
buildings, you
know.
know. that
So
would be
this is
interesting.
all, like, just what is bubbling underneath the surface of things we're actually aware of. Everything we're aware of is going to be consciousness, human consciousness. Everything we're not aware of that's going on, except for you, because you can control your heartbeat and your
Not
body
so
temperature.
anymore.
But everything is, like, in the subconscious. And what you were talking about is, like, we haven't studied enough. And I absolutely 100% agree with you. I think that, but I think we're on the road to that, because at a macro level, like, if we look at different areas of the brain geographically, we'd be like, okay, so if I poke on this part in the back of the brain, that's what this does. The hippocampus, that's what this does. The frontal lobes, that's where language exists. And then we also look at, like, if you study neurology, if you've read books like How the Mind Works, I think it's a Steven Pinker book, and he's written a book called, like, The Blank Slate. It looks at, like, neurophysiology on a micro level. We look at with neurons, synapses,
Right.
and all that stuff. And we understand how things work at a very basic level on the micro scale. It's just the middle part
Mhm.
where all the, like, where all the action happens, and where all the, like, basically it's like this is where the mystery lies, and we're basically burning the candle at both ends scientifically. And I think within 50 to 100 years, we're going to have explanations for why people experience the things that they
Yeah.
might not have an explanation of, if the phenomenon exists within the brain.
And I personally believe it does.
Yeah.
I
do too.
lean more toward the scientific than the spiritual. It's just, I think for the mainstream scientific community, for a lot of it, they got distracted by these stupid dream analysis books in the New Age shop. You know,
Hey.
the hippie ladies' New Age stand. That became studying dreams became
Mhm.
this hippy dippy New Age bullshit. And so mainstream science turns its back on it when that's what they should be exploring.
I think a lot of the issue with anything paranormal really is I've talked to so many people that have had experiences that they haven't told
And
anyone
they're not
about.
crazy.
Yeah.
Well, but that's the thing
Yeah.
is these people that you talk to that have experiences, they do not talk about it. And the reason they don't is you don't want to sound crazy. So the problem that you have
Also
is
condescending and,
well, the
just
problem
belittling.
that tends to happen is the people that are like, I saw a UFO, or the people that had some sort of astral projection experience, or, see ghosts. Sometimes people, they don't want to talk about them because they know this could ostracize me socially. This could be bad for my career. So they don't talk about it, whereas the people that are talking about that, there's already something maybe a little off about them to where they don't have that same sense that some people do to like, oh, I should be careful who I tell about this. I should maybe not tell my coworkers this crazy alien abduction story. These kinds of people that are willing to talk about it are maybe what gives that bad name, that makes, that stigmatizes, that makes scientists weary because they're like, well, they don't want to be associated.
I understand where it comes from both sides, because part of it you're just like, well, like there's nothing worse than being mansplained your own thoughts, like to paraphrase, right? Like, I'm going to tell you what you actually think or what you actually went through, and it's like, well, no, fuck you. Like that's
I know what it is.
I feel like I know what my thoughts are, and if I don't, that means everything's chaos, right?
Well,
and no one wants to deal with that psychologically, or there's a lot of ego in there, and it's basically
definitely.
And it's not ego in a like a negative way. It's just like there's a lot of self, right? Like, hey, if I say this, I'm kind of putting myself out on a limb. So, tell us more astral projection stories.
Well, what's interesting is a lot of the stories you talked about, Chris, were while you were sleeping or in sleep-like states. I've also had experience with what I'm not sure if I would call it astral projection or out-of-body experiences. I had these a lot as a child, and they could just be extreme disassociation. But I remember, especially if I was uncomfortable in situations as a kid, I would find myself all of a sudden almost like hovering above myself, looking down at myself and the situation. And during those moments, people would be saying my name, trying to get my attention, nothing, and all of a sudden I would feel kind of like almost like a snap, and I'd be like, oh, what? I'm sorry, I didn't hear you. Where am I? And this happened numerous times. I even had experiences where I didn't necessarily know I was having an out-of-body experience. I would move something, and then what I thought was go back and sit down in the place I was, and all of a sudden somebody would notice, like, hey, who moved that? I'm like, oh, I did. They're like, no, you didn't get out of your chair. I was like, yeah, I walked over, I picked it up, and I set it down. They're like, no, I was looking at you the whole time talking to you, you didn't move. And so I was like, well, that's kind of weird, because there the item is, it moved, they didn't notice it moving, they just were like, hey, why is that there? And I swore that I had just walked and picked it up. So I thought those kinds of things were really interesting, because I didn't know they were happening until somebody pointed them out. So I don't know how to explain those ones. I was definitely not dreaming for those.
Right, we're not saying like things defy explanation. We're saying, I don't know, is a way better answer than it was astral projection.
Yeah.
Well, I think those ones, to me, they're just more interesting sometimes, like the ones where people are awake then, because it's easy for you to say, maybe it was a dream. Like, that's kind of easy for you to rationalize to yourself, but when you're like, whoa, what was that? Like, those ones, I don't know if they're the same thing. I don't know if they're the same as astral projection, because like what you're talking about, and what I think of as traditional astral projection is traveling, going from one place to another, not just being within the same
being in
space.
the kitchen, the cocina in South America. That's trippy.
That was one of the weirdest, probably the weirdest experience of my life. Unless we want to talk about the other thing that we talked about earlier, but we'll see. That's not on this topic. But,
we can save that for another time.
We can save that for another one. But then, the traveling and doing it intentionally, I think, is a different thing. Because I never intend to do this. Like, this doesn't, when I wake up after one of these things, I don't feel good. I mean, I don't ever feel good when I wake up, but specifically it's this weird kind of feeling that I did go somewhere, but without ever leaving. And
the world feels a little bit bigger, doesn't it?
Yeah, I suppose so.
Yeah.
But then to think that, and this isn't like, it's going to sound like, if you haven't heard the story before, just crazy conspiracy bullshit, but what was called Project Stargate.
I know what you're talking about.
Yeah, and it was called a bunch of other things before that. Started in the 70s, finally disbanded supposedly in the 90s, but it was declassified by the CIA that the CIA did have programs, remote viewing programs for espionage.
Avoid the movie, but definitely read John Ronson's book.
Oh, the Men Who Stare at Ghosts. I agree. The movie is
and his
okay.
He's got a three-part documentary series called The Crazy Rulers of the World.
Right, yeah. Yeah,
where
it
talks about like he meets up with like actual Delta Force instructors who also happen to believe that you can walk through walls and stuff, and they never quite, or they can be manipulated by this thing that looks like a spirograph. He's got like this little defense tool, and he's just like he puts it over the finger of this one guy, and all of a sudden the guy's like doing what he wants. He's like manipulating this guy with like a puppet. Part of it's probably like very specified judo and like the ligaments in your hand and stuff, but part of it's just he's just like, ooh, I'm doing all this crazy also woo-woo stuff.
Funny story about that.
But something like $20 million or something was spent on this program.
So much money.
And there was just like a bunch of 4 psychics in a bunker in Utah trying to get into the Kremlin.
Right. And also, I think there was a when the Dead Zone was a TV show that was being produced out of Canada. They had an episode where they hired Johnny, the character from the Dead Zone, to actually try to find Bin Laden. And it's like, then I heard in the 2000s at some point, we had actually looked into the Defense Department spent some money on psychic mediums or some type of paranormal like investigator. Hey, can we remote view and try to find Bin Laden? And it's like, we have spy satellites, we have drones, we have special forces on the ground, and all of that, plus psychics, didn't find Bin Laden until we found his courier in Abbottabad, Pakistan.
Well, when you were talking about, the government spent all this money, me and my bestie, Paula, a little shout out there, when we were young, I don't know how old we were, but I remember we had heard about this. We're like, wow, the government believes in this stuff. Maybe there's something to this. And as I've actually posted a photo on the Instagram page, I have this collection of these Time Life books. And there was all sorts of ones about remote viewing, astral projection.
It's a goal in my life to one day collect that entire collection.
Yeah, I have almost the whole collection now.
Oh, you do?
Yeah.
Oh my God,
There was one about going through walls, and we had just either read or watched something that was a documentary about this government program, and she and I were like, we can do this. I'm sure I talked her into this, and she was just kind of like, all right, maybe. I'm like, no, we got this. We got this.
Oh, God.
And I remember we were upstairs in my loft. My mom was downstairs, and she and I were like, all right.
Started hearing
hands. Yep. No. Held hands, and we're like, all right, 1, 2, you hear. Thump, 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 thump. Bam! Ow! And my mom comes running up, and she's like, oh my God, are you girls okay? What did you do? And we're both just like rubbing our faces and our arms because we both like last minute like kind of turned like, oh, this isn't going to work. Like, we knew we just hit that wall, and we bounced off of the wall.
That's why you failed.
Probably, and that's what we said. We're like, we didn't try hard enough.
You didn't phase out.
My mom was just like, all right, if you're all right, do I have to worry about you reading these books? We're like, no, we're good. She's like, all right, just try to like bend a spoon or something next time. We're like, okay, no more walking through walls.
One day she comes home and just all of the cutlery is all bent, and she's like, well, you said, like, you can't get mad at us. You said to bend spoons.
That's funny. One thing I was going to ask you about these astral projection or these experiences, did you notice any feeling of still being attached? A lot of people talk about the silver cord theory, where some people have said they have seen what looks to be like a thin cord or string that's silver connecting them to their physical body.
Even in the spiritual realm, we can't get along. Like we can't
right.
escape the.
I see what you mean. Yeah,
basically, essentially like an umbilical cord. Some people say they just felt almost. They had a feeling as if they were attached to a rubber band, and as they moved, they could feel it getting tighter and tighter. Did you have any experiences like that? No.
I wish I had, because these are terrifying experiences
You would
because
have
I don't.
hard.
Yeah, I would have like.
You
I'm gonna go back.
could get lost.
I felt like I had maybe sleptwalk or something and walked into someone's house.
Oh my gosh! Yeah.
And they might come in and find me and shoot me. Like that's what it felt like.
Are you not intending to be here?
Yeah,
You're not
there was no intention there.
Well, you're lucky you ended up in South America, not Texas.
That's true.
Exactly, yeah. So yeah, I haven't experienced that. I've heard of that, but I haven't experienced that.
I don't recall having any experience like that, but I thought that was very interesting. I've even read of some people feeling as if they've reached the end, so to speak, of their cord, and they feel it pull them back, almost like bungee jumping, like when you get to the end and it just snaps you back, is how they've had that experience, which I think is very interesting.
Yeah, that's something. One of the main guys behind all of this, all these ideas, all these theories, is a guy named Ingo Swann. In the 70s.
Don't like him.
Rude.
He was in the 70s. A lot of the men who stare at goats, I'm sure they talk about him a lot. Because he's a major figure that the the CIA and the government based a lot of their research on his research, and he believed people can actually train themselves. Like if there were a cord like that, you can train yourself to go farther, and farther as in into space and into other dimensions. Things get that kooky through time, through space. I think there was an experiment where he went to look at the rings of Saturn, and it was there, like there's a whole. I've heard some
Why
of it.
Why couldn't you tell us that like Titan has an atmosphere that we can,
Maybe no one asked him.
Yeah, you have to know what to ask, I guess. And then, but
you could totally land on Titan and fly a plane in it. And there's lakes of methane.
Well, I don't know if he can take his astral plane on the astral plane.
But yeah, if you try to dive into this stuff, like if there are websites that will train you to remote view.
Oh, I'm sure it's a black hole like that you just dive into.
Yeah. So I've skirted the edge of it just because of what I experienced.
You're like, I don't know if I want to dive in.
Yeah. There are people like Major Ed Dames who claimed he was a student of Ingo Swann and was involved in these programs in the 70s and 80s and stuff. He's kind of don't want to commit. What's that thing I did last time on the other podcast?
What? Blasphemy?
Not blasphemy, but it's against a person.
Libel.
Libel. I don't want to commit that again here, but he has some very questionable politics.
All right.
And some crazy thoughts also.
Criticism is allowed under
your
free
opinion.
speech, and he's a public figure, so you're good.
Yeah, well, some things that
opinions are allowed on my podcast.
We just won't talk about Scientology. That's what.
No, nope. It's not related to that, but it's not far off. So.
No campfire stories about.
Nope.
Okay. But anyway, yeah, there are people that these programs did exist. Like, is it 20 million at least is spent on this? But some of these people come out of this program kind of go off the deep end, and maybe because of what they were doing in there.
They moved to Sedona.
Yes.
Oh,
actually, I think Ed Dames might be in Sedona. I'm not sure. I'm not sure exactly, but yeah, in places like that, you will find some of these people. But when you dig into them, they were former military. They were under like top secret programs. Yes, now they're in a trailer in Sedona, selling beads.
Yeah.
And they have all these crazy stories, but
make a road trip.
Yeah, so we may have to take a field trip.
Yeah, you guys should do an episode that's just a Sedona adventure and just
visit all that. Planning on it.
We're gonna. Yeah, and this is being like saying this is not saying like you can't enjoy certain things about fiction. Like
absolutely.
I'm squinting at you because I'm like, elaborate.
Where's he going? Doctor Strange. I liked Doctor Strange, and the whole point of it was like, oh, this much, so little, this much, and the universe is so much bigger than you. And then he does astral project, and he gets to experience the majesty of the universe, and there's multiple dimensions, and it's basically Marvel magic, right?
Yeah.
But it's a solid movie, and it's
something like with the most bullshit science in the world, Lucy, the Luc Besson film with Scarlett Johansson.
Even that was too much for me. It's a bridge
like,
too far.
It
was the you only use 10% of your brain bullshit.
But then she is given an experimental drug and starts using more and more of her brain, and she can manipulate space and time. Yeah. It's completely dinosaurs show up in the movie at some point.
Oh, right.
And at the end, she turns into a USB stick.
I think even I don't believe in that.
Yeah, I don't believe in any of that. I enjoyed the hell out of that movie, though.
So yeah, I'm going to read this off of Wikipedia when it comes to scientific reception of astral projection. According to Bob Bruce of the Queensland Skeptics Association, astral projection is just imagining or a dream state. Although parallel universes are mathematically possible, Bruce writes that the existence of an astral plane is contrary to the limits of science.
Party pooper.
We know how many possibilities there are for dimensions, and we know what the dimensions do. None of it correlates with things like astral projection. Bruce attributes astral experiences such as quote-unquote meetings alleged by practitioners to confirmation bias and coincidences. Psychologist Donovan Rawcliffe has written that astral projection can be explained by delusion, hallucination, and vivid dreams.
That guy sounds like a real campfire curmudgeon.
Yeah. Well, here's my campfire curmudgeon. There's James Randi. Mm-hmm. Does anybody know who James Randi is?
I think I know the name.
He is a famous skeptic.
Yep.
Magician.
And magician.
Not saying that in a denigrating way.
Actually, what he calls himself is a conjurer.
Mm-hmm.
Because He claims that magic isn't real, so what he's doing is intentionally deceiving, and by the audience allows
semantics
themselves to deceive him. Out of body astral trips, I call them half-astral trips. If they're made, then I would like
stage banter.
Yeah. If they're made, then I would like to see some evidence of them. These people use their imaginations, and people who believe them use their gullibility in order to accept it. Yeah.
Why did I imagine myself into a kitchen in Central America where a dog was mercilessly barking at me?
Because you are more curious about your Hispanic heritage. And you
wonder. Reading into it. There we go.
You're
I think he's analyzing your dreams.
Wow, Dr. Nick.
He pulled out the dream dictionary for that one. I think you said you had another interesting article that you wanted to read for us,
I
Nick.
do. But just before I leave James Randi here, I wanted to plug his... there's a documentary on him.
Okay.
He's an amazing guy. What's the goddamn name of the movie? It's called The Brilliant Liar or something.
I've heard of it, yeah.
He basically exposed Uri Geller as a fraud.
Oh, you know what? I did see that. Yeah.
Uri Geller, who was...
the spoonbender.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, Uri Geller was involved in these programs. He was brought in, these government programs would bring in psychics, making air quotes and stuff. He was one of the most famous because he was mostly a showman. I'm sure it's I'm not committing libel again this time by saying he's probably a fraud.
No,
he's more of a showman,
it's been
but
pretty much proven.
But he was one of the people that was
it's an
brought in.
honest liar. That's
an honest liar.
It's on Netflix.
I did see
Definitely
that. It's definitely worth a watch.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Randy is a hero. If I could make a movie about a thing, I think it would probably be him.
I still think he's a curmudgeon, but
he is. He's such a curmudgeon. We're gonna have to do an episode about the Project Alpha.
Absolutely.
And I will talk. I will read you about Project Alpha. Project Alpha was a project that duped an academic university that was studying paranormal stuff, and he totally suckered him. And it's great.
I don't know this story.
I know a little bit about this story.
Do we have anything else to cover before I close out? Because did you have any additional stories regarding astral projection or experiences that you wanted to?
No, I was just going to let our listeners know, if you're interested in this, there actually is a WikiHow on how to astral project. I was getting a little kick out of reading it, but if you think this is something you want to try, there are instructions for you there. Go ahead, give it a try, and let us know. Send us your emails. We can check back on it and see if anybody had any success with this.
All right. Well, I'm going to read this article. It's off of Cosmo.
Okay.
The author Ada Calhoun wrote this March 12, 2015. It's called Why I Stopped Believing in Pseudoscience. Subheadline, How a Tarot Card Reading Candle-Burning Teen Became a Total Skeptic.
Oof.
So Ada Calhoun. What's your sign? A woman who asked me at a business meeting that would determine if I would be hired for a project involving a lot of time and a lot of money. She had my resume and references. Why look skyward? Pisces, I replied. Ah, you're emotional, she responded. In fact, the very same day, someone who's known me more than 20 years told me I was singularly unemotional. Whom to believe? My best friend or the stars? Nearly every day I hear people invoke the supernatural, astrology, telepathy, UFOs, etc. If I suggest that I'm skeptical about such things, the conversation can get awkward. I fear I have tanked fledgling friendships by questioning the reliability of, say, auras.
He is giving me looks with every one of these. I just want to let everyone who can't see this know.
Yeah,
every time he says something like aura, he looks at me.
Yeah, I'm getting uncomfortable.
When someone at a cocktail party brings up their
attacked.
recent super accurate psychic reading, I hear myself saying conversation-killing things like, have you read Monster Midway? It explains how cold reading works. It's official. I've become a buzzkill. What annoys me most, perhaps, about proponents of esoterica is that I used to be one. At 14, my friends and I wore pentacles and burned candles and wondered which of us was most likely to go all Firuza Balk in the craft. I read tarot cards. My then-boyfriend did a rune reading and helped me weigh college choices. When I had a cold, I put a minute amounts of echinacea into my water, taking umbrage when my cousin referred to them as cult drops. But doubt crept in. Once, a women's magazine I read as a tween ran the same horoscope 2 months in a row, and when the reader pointed this out, the editorial note said something like, "You know this stuff isn't real, right?"
Ooh.
It was like how I felt finding out from Super Fudge about Santa. Oh, God, Super Fudge.
Is that the series
Judy
where
Blume?
he eats the turtle?
I can't remember.
I just remember there was one where there's a kid named Fudge.
Yeah, it's Judy Blume.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There was one where he fucking eats a turtle.
Yeah.
That's
and
terrible.
it goes in his stomach.
Yeah.
Like he swallows it.
Traumatizing.
Yeah, it was. Anyway, sorry.
Ultimately, my gullibility was dealt a death blow by a University of Texas at Austin College course called pseudoscience. Pseudoscience is something that pretends to be science but isn't. For example, because its claims are demonstrably bogus, or because they're immune to proof or disproof. The class addressed subjects like spirit photography, palmistry, and alien abduction. The professor, Dr. Rory Coker, who is also a magician, lay down on a bed of nails to demonstrate how easy it is. He showed us how to stage flying saucer photographs and seances. He also explained that pseudoscience has been dangerous. Phrenology, which is head shape as key to character, has been used to justify racial prejudice.
Yeah, that's true.
Yep, Django Unchained. Belief in psychic surgery has kept people with treatable diseases from getting medical attention. Andy Kaufman.
Mm-hmm.
Steve Jobs. That class blew my mind and made me a fan of Mythbusters, Mythbusters, as well as James Randi, Bill Nye, Penn and Teller, Snopes, and the guys at Scam School.
Snopes is in trouble, people. They need your help.
Let's fund Snopes.
I've heard.
Yes. And it made it harder to ever see the Loch Ness Monster and Bigfoot pictures again without laughing. Learning from that class how the sausage was made became harder to stomach it and watch.
You learned everything in that class, including cooking.
I know. It's how to thwart bullshit class. Man,
I definitely didn't take this class. I was surprised.
It's one thing for me to ignore my own horoscopes, but when faced with an ardent believer in something from that class, astral projection, say, or dowsing, which is, you guys know what dowsing is?
Yeah.
It's like finding water sources with a stick.
Sticks.
I wind up in social graces versus social conscience showdown. What should I do? Nod and smile, or quote Carl Sagan about how extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence? It's not the first, this is the second time Carl Sagan has made an appearance on the show in 2 episodes. Many of my friends do holistic and homeopathic treatments, but these days I'm good with Western medicine, which has saved my life twice. Once when my appendix burst, and once when I needed a C-section. But more power to the adventurous. Usually I just chalk it up to a different level of curiosity about New Age. The other day, when I learned someone I knew was going in for Reiki, I flinched. "Does that work?" I said, probably just like that. I kind of thought it had been debunked. He seemed offended. In that moment, I kind of wished he'd either taken that UT class or that I hadn't. In practice, I see a spectrum. Some examples of pseudoscience are vicious, like medical hoaxes preying on the vulnerable, and others are silly and sometimes entertaining, like pretending our birth month has a bearing on our compatibility. Yeah, I'm an Aries, so I get angry.
Is that you or the
That's
other?
me.
That's him.
You should have done a voice for them.
I know. Well, I'm not going to be like, "Oh, this is
Don't
written
do
by
it.
a woman."
New choice.
No, I want to hear this.
can do a lady voice.
I want to hear this.
No.
No, we're not doing that.
Okay, we'll save it for the other show.
I get that logic is often no match for superstition or persuasive myths. If I spill salt, I still reflexively throw some over my left shoulder. Thanks, Mom. And I instinctively remove hats from tops of beds. Thanks, transforming preteen viewing of Drugstore Cowboy.
Oh shit, is that a thing?
I don't know.
Oh, no.
I've never seen it.
No, I've never heard.
I find children's enjoyment of Tooth Fairy, Easter Bunny, and Harry Potter to be delightful. Those things make their lives more exciting, and they don't mean those kids can't grow up to be physicists. Maybe innocuous forms of suicides are just the grown-up version, an easy way to inject a little magic into daily life, to willfully suspend disbelief, to escape reality. And yet I couldn't help but wonder, when I was asked for my sign in that job interview, if I should have said something about how maybe astrology isn't the best way to make important decisions. Or maybe how some people think that conflation of science and not science is why America lags in STEM fields. Or about how she should judge me strictly in the third-dimensional realm. Then when I didn't get the job, I wondered if I should have just lied and said Taurus.
She should have just said, "I don't know." And then that just means She's not coming down anywhere.
That's Ada Calhoun, and that's kind of where I land on this. But at the same time, we're not just talking about the silly things, because we're talking about experiences. We're talking about real people's experiences, and that's in this reality. And especially, like, for me, what makes me a curmudgeon is that I value things that are real. I want to believe things that are true, and I don't want to believe things that aren't true. And especially in the last 6 months, there's been so much bullshit. And I feel like the reason I wanted to start this with you, Heidi, is that just, you know what? I can't cotton any bullshit anymore. Like, I can't. I have to draw a line. I have to say, like, you know what? It might be insufferable, but we live in a society, and that society is based on truth.
And I think, too, you and I were having a conversation the other night about how I've had people ask, well, who's the curmudgeon? And the obvious choice is you over there, but at the same time, I think everybody's a little bit of a curmudgeon, and I don't think that means you're no fun or anything. I think that means that you're intelligent, because you're a skeptic, but that doesn't mean that you are so static in your ways that you are unwilling to entertain the thought of something being potentially paranormal. And at the same time, I'm a believer, but I'll take my homeopathic medicine, but I also rely on my heart medicine every day, and I'm not stupid. I know if I don't take that, I die.
We all draw a line, because at some point, like, it's not like nothing matters. That didn't go out the window in 2017. Truth matters.
But then again, truth is we can only experience truth in reality through our personal experiences.
Our own experiences.
So it's all neurochemical things in our brain,
and I think
that's
the best way to basically use, like, plow through and basically set aside wheat from chaff is objective empiricism. That's my tool. That's what I rely on. Not because I'm a scientist, I'm not. But the principles that science, uses. Science isn't like a tool. It's not a thing like. It's not a subject that is just knowledge,
right?
Like history. It is a chisel. It is a mechanism to separate out false things from not false things, mostly by proving things false. Basically, it says, "Hey, I have an idea. Is this idea true? Well, I've devised an experiment to basically to fulfill the hypothesis, and say either if the experiment shows that the hypothesis is true, it means great. That means that there are further-reaching consequences of my hypothesis being true. But if it's false, then I have to go back to the drawing board and come up with a different idea or maybe a different experiment to separate the two out." It's an error-correcting mechanism, and it's existed for 400 years, and it's gotten us to the place where we are. That's what makes me a fucking curmudgeon.
You are a fucking curmudgeon.
All right.
Well, do you want to let everybody know where they can find us?
Yeah, we're on Twitter at CFCurmudge.
And that's CFCURMUDGE.
We are it's campfirecurmudgeon@gmail.com.
That's right. You can email us your experiences there, or if you have anything to say about episodes you've listened to thus far, you can go ahead and give us your feedback. You can also find us on Instagram. That's just Campfire Curmudgeon. Chris, is there anything you'd like to plug? I know you guys are working on another podcast.
Yeah, Nick and I do a podcast, the John Carpentcast, where we work through each episode the filmography of director John Carpenter.
Where can they find you?
thejohncarpentcast.com. On Facebook, just the John Carpentcast.
iTunes.
Most
any
podcast apps. You can
apps.
find it,
I don't think we're on Stitcher, but if you have an iPhone and you open up a podcast app.
Both these podcasts we're on iTunes. We're on Facebook.
We were on hiatus for a while, but we will have new episodes coming out very, very soon.
Back.
But we're back, yeah. If I could plug one more thing, since this is sort of a paranormal thing.
Sure.
Themed podcast. I was one of the writers on a movie that just came out a few months ago called The Conjuring.
The Conjuring.
Yeah, what's the other one?
I thought you were going to say The Covenant.
The Covenant. No, The Conjuring. The Covenant. No, you're right. Oh, God. I can't remember the name of my own movie.
I think we talked about it with Chelsea, and you're like, The Conjuring was a hit.
Right. Okay.
That was
well,
huge.
You can see how I made that mistake.
No, I could because it's
But yeah, that's available on probably Amazon. I don't know. You can look it up. But
Google it.
It's a demonic possession movie if you like that kind of stuff. It could be fun. It's a horror movie.
Yep, locally produced here in Phoenix.
Oh yeah, produced here in Phoenix.
Yeah, we're out of Phoenix, Arizona, so local shout-outs, things we like to plug. We like Film Bar.
Film Bar, where I'm working there now, so come and see me at
visit
Film
Chris,
Bar.
yeah.
Talk about aliens and ghosts and shit. And
Tell them your astral
have a beer.
projection stories.
Yeah.
Do we have a voicemail?
We do have a voicemail line you can call, and if you don't want to send us your stories, for,
If
online,
you want to rant.
if you want to rant at us. Also, keep in mind, if you do leave us a voicemail, it might get played on the podcast, so if you prefer that we don't do that,
just email us.
let us know. Well, no, just let us know. You can still leave a voicemail, but just say, please don't play this, or don't say my name. But that phone number you can call is 480-442-0124.
And in closing, I'd just like to thank you for listening to us this far. This has been a fun experience for me. I know that Heidi feels the same. And Chris, it's been really fun having you on as well as a guest.
We can continue a lot of this discussion if you want to come up with zoo forms. There's too much to talk about here, but it's related, but it's a different thing. So that could be another episode, I think.
Yeah, I think we'll definitely be having you back.
If you're interested in this subject, there's a whole other side to this story that's called zoo forms that you guys should probably break into.
All right. Well, we will be back again soon with another episode of the show. Thank you so much for listening, and have a great rest of your day.
Day, night, whatever.
Yeah, take care. Bye-bye.